And we have the minister. So I'm calling this meeting to order. And I want to thank Minister Goodale for his presence here to talk about the main estimates. And just before he does start, I just wanted to take note that this is possibly the last time that the minister appears before this particular committee. And I just wanted to, on behalf of the committee, thank him for his, not only his attendance here, but his willingness to cooperate with the committee and also to review all of the amendments that have been put forward by this committee to the minister and his willingness to accept quite a high percentage of them. So again, I want to thank you for your cooperation and thank you for your relationship with the committee. So with that,
you mean this parliament, right?
Pardon?
You mean this parliament, right?
This parliament, yes,
Okay.
Yes. We're not going back to the days of Laurier or anything of that nature. No. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Chairman, well, thank you for your very kind remarks. Much appreciated, and glad to be back with the committee once again. This time, of course, presenting the 2019-2020 main estimates for the public safety portfolio. And to help explain all of those numbers in more detail and to answer your questions today, I am pleased to be joined by Gina Wilson, the new Deputy Minister of Public Safety Canada. I believe this is her first appearance before this committee. No stranger, of course, in the Department of Public Safety, but she has been for the last couple of years the Deputy Minister in the Department of Women and Gender Equality, which is a department that she presided over the creation of. And with the Deputy Minister today, Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP, Brian Brennan, who is to my right, David Vigneault, the Director of CSIS to my left, John Nosowski, the President of CBSA, further to my right, and Kelly, the Commissioner of the Correctional Service of Canada, and Nick Lepoint, Chief Financial Officer for the Parole Board of Canada, is to my left. The top priority of any government, of course, Mr. Chair, is to keep its citizens safe and secure. And I'm very proud of the tremendous work that is being done by these officials and the employees who work following their lead diligently to serve Canadians and protect them from all manner of public threats. The nature and severity of those threats continues to evolve and change over time. And as a government, we are committed to supporting the skilled men and women who work so hard to protect us by giving them the resources that they need to ensure that they can respond. And the estimates, of course, are the principal vehicle for doing that. The main estimates for 2019-20 reflect that commitment to keep Canadians safe while safeguarding their rights and freedoms. You will note that portfolio-wide, the total authorities requested this year would result in a net increase of $256.1 million for this fiscal year, or 2.7% more than last year's main estimates. Of course, some of the figures go up, some of the figures go down, but the net result is a 2.7% increase. One key item is an investment of $135 million in fiscal year 2019-20 for the sustainability and modernization of Canada's border operations. The second is $42 million for Public Safety Canada, the RCMP, and the CBSA to take action against guns and gangs. Minister Blair will be speaking in much more detail about the work that's being done under these initiatives when he appears before the committee. For my part today, I will simply summarize several other funding matters affecting my Department of Public Safety Canada and all of the related agencies. The department is estimating a net spending decrease of $246.8 million this fiscal year, or 21.2% less than last year, and that is because of a decrease of $410.7 million in funding levels that expired last year under the disaster financial assistance arrangements. Now, there's another item coming later on where the number goes up for the future year, so you have to offset those two in order to follow the flow of the cash. But that rather significant drop in the funding for the department itself, 21.2%, is largely due to that change in DFAA, where the funding level expired in 2018-2019. There was also a decrease of some $79 million related to the completion of Canada's presidency of the G7 in the year 2018. These decreases are partially offset by a number of funding increases, including $25 million grant to Avalanche Canada to support its life-saving safety and awareness efforts, $14.9 million for infrastructure projects in Indigenous communities related to security, $10.1 million in additional funding for the First Nations policing program, and $3.3 million to address post-traumatic stress injuries affecting our skilled public safety personnel. The main estimates also reflect measures announced a few weeks ago in Budget 2019. For Public Safety Canada, that is the department, these include $158.5 million to improve our ability to prepare for and respond to emergencies and natural disasters in Canada, including in Indigenous communities, of which $155 million partially offsets that reduction in DFAA that I just referred to. There's also $4.4 million to combat the truly heinous and growing crime of child sexual exploitation online. There's $2 million for the Security Infrastructure Program to continue to help communities at risk of hate-motivated crime to improve their security infrastructure. There's $2 million to support efforts to assess and respond to economic-based national security threats. And there's $1.8 million to support a new cybersecurity framework to protect Canada's critical infrastructure, including in the finance, telecommunications, energy, and transport sectors. As you know, in the 2019 federal budget, we also announced $65 million as a one-time capital investment in the STARS air rescue system to acquire new emergency helicopters. That important investment does not appear in the 2019-2020 main estimates because it was accounted for in the 2018-19 fiscal year. That is before this past March 31st. Let me turn now to the 2019-2020 main estimates for the other public safety portfolio organizations other than the department itself. I'll start with CBSA, which is seeking a total net increase this fiscal year of $316.9 million. That's 17% over the 17.5% over the 2018-19 estimates. In addition to that large sustainability and modernization for border operations item that I previously mentioned, some other notable increases include $10.7 million to support activities related to the immigration levels plan that was announced for the 3 years 2018 to 2020. Those things include security screening, identity verification, the processing of permanent residents when they arrive at the border, and so forth, all the responsibilities of CBSA. There's an item for $10.3 million for the CBSA's Postal Modernization Initiative, which is critically important at the border, and $7.2 million to expand safe examination sites, increase intelligence and risk assessment capacity, and enhance the Detector Dog program to give our officers the tools they need to combat Canada's ongoing opioid crisis. There's also approximately $100 million for compensation and employee benefit plans related to collective bargaining agreements. Budget 2019 investments affecting CBSA main estimates this year include a total of $381.8 million over 5 years to enhance the integrity of Canada's borders and the asylum system. While my colleague Minister Blair will provide more details on this, the CBSA would be receiving $106.3 million of that funding in this fiscal year. Budget 2019 also includes $12.9 million to ensure that immigration and border officials have the resources to process a growing number of applications for Canadian visitor visas, work and study permits. There's $5.6 million to increase the number of detector dogs deployed across the country in order to protect Canada's hog farmers and meat processors from the serious economic threat posed by African swine fever. And there's $1.5 million to protect people from unscrupulous immigration consultants by improving oversight and strengthening compliance and enforcement measures. I would also note that the government announced through the budget its intention to introduce the legislation necessary to expand the role of the RCMP's Civilian Review and Complaints Commission so it can also serve as an independent review body for CBSA. That proposed legislation, Bill C-98, was introduced in the House last month. Turning now, Mr. Chair, to the RCMP, its estimates for 2019-20 reflect a $9.2 million increase over last year's funding levels. The main factors contributing to that change include increases of $32.8 million to compensate members injured in the performance of their duties, $26.6 million for the Ensuring Security and Prosperity in the Digital Age initiative, and $10.4 million for forensic toxicology in Canada's new drug-impaired driving regime. The RCMP's main estimates also reflect an additional $123 million related to Budget 2019. These include $96.2 million to strengthen the RCMP's overall policing operations and $3.3 million to ensure that air travelers and workers at airports are effectively screened on site. The increases in funding to the RCMP are offset by certain decreases in the 2019-2020 main estimates, including $132 million related to the completion of Canada's G7 presidency in 2018 and $51.7 million related to sunsetting capital infrastructure projects. Moving on to the Correctional Service of Canada, it's seeking an increase of $136 million or 5.6% over last year's estimates. The main factor contributing to the change are twofold: $32.5 million as an increase in the care and custody program. Most of that, $27.6 million, is for employee compensation, and there is $95 million announced in Budget 2019 to support CSC's custodial operations. The Parole Board of Canada is estimating a decrease of approximately $700,000 in these main estimates, or 1.6% less than the amount requested last year. That's due to one-time funding received last year to assist with negotiated salary adjustments. There is also, of course, Mr. Chair, in the estimates, information about the Office of the Correctional Investigator, CSIS, and other agencies that are a part of my portfolio. I simply make the point that this is a very busy portfolio, and the people who work within Public Safety Canada and all the related agencies carry a huge load of public responsibilities in the interests of public safety. They always put the public safety first, while at the same time ensuring that the rights and freedoms of Canadians are properly protected. With that, Mr. Chair, my colleagues and I would be happy to try to answer your questions.
Thank you, Minister. With that, Mr. Picard, 7 minutes.
Merci. Monsieur le ministre, mesdames, messieurs, bienvenue et merci de vous prêter encore une fois à l'exercice. D'entrée de jeu, je vais aborder tout de suite la question de mon sujet favori, les crimes financiers. Et si je combine les crédits à la GRC et au ministère de la Santé publique lui-même, la combinaison fait un peu plus de 7 millions d'investissements.
There's no translation.
Testing, translation. So my question then relates to my favorite topic, financial crimes.
Is about 7 more million. What kind of improvement that we're looking for? Is it just the money laundering unit or IMET as well and other unit working closely to either financial crimes and or terrorism financing?
Let me ask Deputy Commissioner Brennan to
Thank you.
To comment. He incidentally is brand new on the job, just in the last number of months, but he will get used to the very pleasant experience of committee hearings of the House of Commons.
Thank you, Minister. Chairman. So the increase in funding would go to all of those areas, but specifically to the numbers, exactly where all the dollars will go, I'm not in a position to speak to that. But that investment is looking to increase our investigational capability and the support systems needed around those types of very specific investigations.
If I could add to that, Mr. Picard, the estimates show $4.1 million to the RCMP directly for enhanced federal policing capacity. There's about $819,000 to Finance Canada to support its related work to its work related to money laundering. There's $3.6 million to FinTrack to strengthen operational capacity, and there's $3.28 million to the Department of Public Safety to create the Anti-Money Laundering Action, Coordination, and Enforcement Team, which is an effort to bring all of these various threads more coherently together so that everybody is operating on exactly the same page with the greatest efficiency and interagency cooperation.
Thank you, sir. With respect to CSIS, Canadian strategy with respect to Middle East. What do we have to change in our strategy? What doesn't work, or what has to be changed? And with respect to the recent events here and close to us, Middle East doesn't seem to be the only nature of threats we have. So what the focus on Middle East?
David?
Thank you, Minister. Specifically, it's our effort to support the all-of-government approach to the Middle East operations, so the military and diplomatic operations in Syria and Iraq. So it is the money you see here for the main estimates are the specific allocation for CSIS to support those activities. So we do intelligence collection in the region and here in Canada to support that activity. Your question also, it's the focus of this estimate was on the Middle East, but as you pointed out, Mr. Picard, we are obviously concerned about activities and terrorism all over the world, not just, in the Middle East.
Thank you.
Mr. Picard, if I could just add one small anecdote. I had the opportunity at an earlier stage to have a discussion with the person who was then the U.S. Secretary of Defense with respect to the change that had been made in Canada's deployment in the Middle East with respect to the international coalition against Daesh. And I noted the very significant increase in the investment we were making with respect to intelligence activities. And the U.S. Secretary commented very favorably on the work of Canadians in that particular zone, particularly the intelligence work, which he indicated was first class and was very helpful to all members of that coalition in dealing effectively with the threats posed by Daesh.
It's my first experience as first mandate, and I understand that we have to justify why we spend money. And my next question will be why we don't spend specific amount of money on a specific topic. So maybe justifying to spend more money. Infrastructure on cyber threat. I see that we have $1,700,000 and more bucks on cyber threat. My concern is not that we have money on cyber threat, is that we don't have money anywhere else. And based on what we studied on democratic institutions, ethics and private information here, cyber threat and financial crimes, this subject was all over the place. And people are getting scary learning what we learn day in and day out about this threat that is multi-faced. And I don't see anything about this topic specifically in this budget. But would you please take a chance to maybe
I would be happy to, Mr. Picard, because it is quite possible for people to look at that one number, $1.8 million, and wonder how that covers the field. Well, it doesn't. This is one little snapshot of one portion of the spending that we are devoting to the whole cause of cybersecurity. Through our last 2 or 3 budgets, we have included a series of investments. They, of course, roll forward through the estimates process, but you actually need to examine the sections of the budget that lay out the more complete picture. And through various departments, we are investing through the budget last year $750 million to enhance cybersecurity in Canada. A portion of that creates the new Cyber Response Center. A portion of that creates the new cybercrime unit within the RCMP. There are a whole series of investments to enhance cybercrime, our approach to cybercrime and cybersecurity. In the last budget, the key investment was $145 million, of which this is the first very small tranche, $145 million to support the security of our critical cyber systems. And we have identified 4 in particular: finance, telecommunications. Remind me what I want to make sure I get the 4 critically.
Oh, well, we can come back to that, Mr.
There is,
Picard.
I'm trying to
All over
recite the
time.
budget speech,
Yeah.
but in 4 particular areas where we will be investing to support new legislation that will require certain standards of these critical sectors and create the enforcement mechanisms to make sure that those standards are met. It is so vital, Mr. Picard, that our critical cyber systems protect themselves and employ all the procedures that are necessary to keep themselves safe and secure. We are creating the legislative framework to make sure that happens, with the right kind of enforcement mechanisms backing it up, and the funding, of which the 1.8 is just the very first small tranche, will make sure that these systems are indeed safe and secure with
Thank
the
you.
right enforcement to enforce the requirements.
Thank you, Minister Goodale, for that lengthy response. Mr. Palouse, 7 minutes. And it is 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, hello. I have a question for you, Minister, a question touching on a number of your agencies. This is information we got from TVA Quebec recently regarding Mexican drug cartels doing trading up here in Canada now, doing business here. I met the Mexican ambassador to Canada yesterday evening to discuss this issue. So my question is, first up, is the information that's been shared on the media, sometimes we don't get the right information on the media, but do you know what's really being done to contain Mexican cartels in Canada? As well, we, of course, trade with our friend Mexico. We don't hold this against Mexico, but people coming up using Mexican passports, working in these cartels and getting into Canada. So I want to know what we're doing to counter this.
Monsieur Paulus, and it is important to get accurate information in the public domain. The figures that you have referred to in certain media outlets are figures that have been very perplexing to CBSA because they have not been able to verify where that arithmetic came from. Mr. Osowski may well want to comment upon this because over the last number of days he has had his officials in CBSA scouring the records to see where this arithmetic originates, and it simply cannot be verified. What I can tell you is that CBSA has determined that the number of inadmissibility cases of all types of criminality for Mexican foreign nationals during the period over the last 18 months from January of 2018 until now, the total number for all criminality is 238. Of these 238, only 27 were reported inadmissible due to links to known organized criminality, 3 of which were for suspected linkages to cartels. So the real numbers are substantially lower than the numbers that have been referred to in the media. And of those 27 people who were reported inadmissible due to links to organized criminality, all of them have been removed from Canada. They are no longer in the country.
OK, merci, Monsieur le ministre, pour ça. Mais il reste qu'un individu qui a été identifié.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your response. But there is a person who was clearly identified. He was known to Mexico, recognized to be a criminal in Mexico, but came into Canada. So how is it that they got in? How about the data banks? Doesn't the Canadian Data Bank allow us to know that someone is a criminal and slated as such down in Mexico? How's it working at CBSA?
All of the proper checks in terms of identity, records, background, immigration issues, criminality, all of that is thoroughly checked by CBSA at the border. Mr. Osowski, can you comment on the specific individual that Mr. Paulus is referring to?
So thank you. So I would just say that in the first instance, I think it's important to understand the layers of security. So we work in airports and with Mexican officials in Mexico to first try and prevent people from even getting on flights to Canada if they don't have the proper documentation or there's any sort of concerns in terms of misrepresentation or criminality. That said, when they do arrive, if they do arrive and there are concerns, then our officers are very well trained to deal with that upon arrival. They could be allowed to leave at that point if they stay at the airport until the next flight and they go home. If they do come in and we suspect that there's some work that we need to do, we will check in secondary inspection for sort of any criminality. We do, during that same reporting period, I can say that we found 18 people who had used fraudulent travel documents that we were able to prevent from entering. And so it's layers of security. And with respect to that specific individual, he has been removed from the country.
Mais je comprends que vous pouvez avoir l'information.
Very well. I do understand that you can get information ahead of time. There are agreements with Mexico, and your agents get this information. But when people come in, there are thousands of Mexicans, of course, who do come into Canada. In the CBSA systems, is there a computerized system? Information about passports isn't necessarily available, but certainly people who are identified as criminals, aren't they identified somehow? Isn't there something like Interpol? Don't people share this information from country to country? People coming in, isn't there information about this passport?
So I think it's important to understand the differences that with Mexico, visas are not required to come to Canada. We lifted the visas requirement a couple of years ago, and they travel now on what's called electronic travel authorization program. That's a lighter touch in terms of criminality, but as I mentioned, if they arrive and there are some concerns or some indicators, we do those criminal checks at the port of entry upon their arrival.
Merci. Monsieur le ministre,
Thank you very much. Mr. Minister, on the 10th of May at the Pearson Airport, there was a fuel truck that ran into a plane. We learned that the vehicle tried 3 times to crash into the airplane. Of course, the police have investigated the matter. The Globe and Mail has told us that it was a deliberate and willful attempt to, an attack of some sort. Do you have any information about this?
no information that I'm in a position to share at this time, Mr. Paulus, with respect to that particular incident. I would, however, undertake to see if there is some further detail that I can share with you as a colleague in the House of Commons. I will inquire and determine what information can be put into the public domain.
Thank you for that, Mr. Paulus. Minister, Mr. Dubé, 7 minutes, please.
Merci. Pardon, merci.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, all of you, for being here with us. Minister, when we received Mr. McGuinty here to discuss the first report of the Committee of Parliamentarians, one of the questions I asked him at the time was, you may remember where in the report this was, I'm not sure, but it was about not being allowed to share the spending for figures for national security. But in the report, there was mention of the sums spent by the Australians in this area. And when I asked Mr. McGuinty, he was able to tell me that, yes, members of the committee had asked the question of the people making the presentation. And they were told, well, it's a national security issue. We cannot share this information. So could you clarify how come we can learn about how much the Australians are spending? They're one of our Five Eyes, and they have a similar plan to ours, but we can't talk about our plan.
Our concern, Monsieur Dubé, is in providing information in the public domain that could, in fact, reveal sensitive and very critical operational details of the RCMP or CSIS or CBSA in a way that would compromise their ability to keep Canadians safe. The information can be shared in the context of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. It would also be available to the new National Security and Intelligence Review Agency that will be created under Bill C-59. But those are classified environments in which the members of Parliament around the table have the appropriate clearance levels. It's more difficult to share that
Je comprends
information
que c'est
here.
classifié et les limites.
I understand that it's classified and that there are restrictions that go with that. I don't want to go on too long on this, given that I have other questions about other topics. But as I'm saying, the Australians do much as we are, and the report communicates that. Mr. McGuinty tells us that it's possible that the Parliamentary Committee didn't get an adequate response. So what is it that's different here from what goes on in Australia? I understand the framework, but your logic, doesn't seem to fall in with the Australian logic. That's what it looks like.
Well, far be it from me to be critical of the Australians, but we have our own Canadian logic, and our obligation here is to protect the public safety and the national security of Canadians. Mr. Dubé, I would simply encourage Mr. McGuinty and the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians to pursue this issue with the various security agencies, which they have the authority to do under the legislation, to secure the information that they believe they need.
Yes,
I would encourage
Minister, I'm gonna
the
have to
agencies to
interrupt
be
you just 'cause
forthcoming.
My time is limited, and this is probably the only round I'm getting to ask you questions. I just want to say I do think it's an important thing to raise because I think expenditures have a particular role for all parliamentarians to play beyond just the committee with clearance, where it can pertain more to operational details. Money is a whole different game, as Mr. Picard is alluding to in his questions about the role that even we can play as those around this table at this committee. I do want to move on that note to CBSA and the CRCC. We know there's C-98 in front of the House. I'm just wondering if you can clarify. So there's the 500,000 for CBSA, there's 420,000 for CRCC. So I have two questions about that. One is that all the money that's going to come out of the C98 mechanism, or is there more money following that to implement those measures? And two, what explains that discrepancy? So is 500,000 to CBSA, are they doing the work internally for review and oversight, or is that going to be sent back off to CRCC once C98 has become law?
Again, the numbers that are in this set of estimates are the initial snapshot of 1 year's slice of the beginning of a process. And this is a very significant process where the CRCC has previously, as you know, totally focused on the RCMP. We will now be broadening the agency, so it will continue its review function with respect to the RCMP, but it will also assume responsibility for the review function with respect to CBSA. And the expectation is that any complaint that the public has with respect to officer behavior or a particular situation that developed at the border or some other topic such as the handling of detention, for example, a complaint could be filed with this new expanded body and they would have the complete jurisdiction to investigate that complaint from the public.
Well, with all due respect, it's better late than never, and I certainly hope it has time to pass before Parliament rises. My last question
So do I,
is,
Mr. Dubé.
Vote 15, it talks about economic-based national security threat as part of CSIS's mandate. What is an economic-based national security threat in the context of what you're allowed to tell us here today?
Well, I could give my layman's explanation of that. David, would you like to provide the official definition?
Yes, thank you, Minister. Merci, Monsieur Dubé. Essentially, this is related to overall foreign investment into the country. When we're looking at different countries, different state-owned enterprises, different entities trying to invest in the greenfield investment here in Canada, it's the ability for the service to contribute to the effort of the national security community to assess if there are any national security links to these transactions. Sometimes it's because of ownership, sometimes it's because of the nature of the technology that it might be acquired. So it's our overall ability to investigate and produce the right analysis to support decision-making of public safety, other agency, and ultimately the Cabinet under the Investment Canada Act.
Thank you, Mr. Dubé. Mr. Spengeman, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Goodale, we're coming up on the end of the parliamentary term. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you and your senior team on behalf of the people of Mississauga Lakeshore, the riding that I represent, for your work, and through you, the women and men, the members of our civil service who do this incredibly important work in public safety and national security day by day. A couple of days ago, I had an opportunity to meet with a group of amazing grade 7 and 8 students at Olive Grove School, which is an Islamic school in my riding. And it was part of Civics Canada's Rep Day, which is a day to bring elected representatives into the classroom. Great discussion. One of the points that we did discuss was violent crime and specifically gun violence. And I know we have Minister Blair joining us later on. When we straw polled among the students the issues that are of importance, when it came to gun violence and violent crime, almost every hand went up among grade 7s and 8s. And I wanted to ask you, we've got a $2 million commitment towards a program called Protecting Community Gathering Places from Hate-Motivated Crimes, but we also have the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence. And what are we doing at the moment with respect to addressing the root causes of violent crime and also making sure that there's a level of security that grade 7 and 8 students have who belong to a faith-based school, that they feel safe when they study in their community, in their center of learning?
A very important question, Mr. Spengeman, and there's several answers to that. Thank you for flagging the good work of the Canada Centre, the Community Outreach Centre within my department. Their whole objective is to coordinate and support activities at the community level across the country. Some run by municipalities, some run by provincial governments, some run by academic organizations, some run by police services that reach out to the community to counter that insidious process of radicalization to violence. Some of their work is purely research. Other is program delivery. Other is assisting groups that provide the countervailing messages to people who are on a negative trajectory toward extremism and violence. The Canada Centre has been up and running now for 2.5 years, and it has done some very important work. The specific program I think you're referring to is a different one. It's the Security Infrastructure Program, which when we started in government 3.5 years ago was funded at the rate, I believe, of about $1 million a year, and was a good initiative, but fairly limited in its scope. We have quadrupled the funds, so it's now up to $4 million a year. We've expanded the criteria for what this program can in fact support. One of the recent changes, for example, is allowing some of the funding from the Security Infrastructure Program to be used for training in schools or in places of worship or community centers, where that training can actually assist. If there were an incident, what do you do? It's sort of like a fire drill in school. How do you react, say, to an active shooter or to an incident of violence? It was found in the case of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh that training in advance had made a real difference in that situation last fall, where there were people who were present on the scene who knew, because they had been properly trained, exactly how to react to an active shooter situation. And it's the considered opinion of people in that synagogue that training made a material difference in saving lives. So we have adjusted the terms of the Security Infrastructure Program to allow for that to be part of what the program can pay for, in addition to closed circuit television, better doors, barriers and other protective features within the design of a building, the renovation of the building itself, to make it as effective as it can be to keeping people safe.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me shift gears and take you to the cyber domain. I think there's $9.2 million that are going towards protecting the rights and freedoms of Canadians. One concern that's raised is cyberbullying, particularly with respect to LGBTQ2 plus youth and people, but also other vulnerable communities. Can you tell the committee what the department is doing with respect to online bullying specifically?
This is an initiative that involves my department, but other departments within the Government of Canada as well. The whole purpose being, first of all, to raise the level of awareness about some of the insidious activity that is going on online. It may be bullying, it may be child sexual exploitation, and often one leads to the other. It might be human trafficking. It might be the violent extremism in another cadre. It could be attacks on our democratic institutions. There are a whole range of social harms that are perpetrated on the internet, and our objective is to raise the level of public awareness so that people understand better. Have a higher level of digital literacy in terms of what they're being subjected to online, being able to distinguish between what is legitimate activity and what is not. We've also, as I said earlier, created new cyber response systems. One within the communication security establishment, another within the RCMP. Making, in terms of the police unit, making it more accessible to the public with a one window reporting mechanism, so that people know where they can go to report cybercrime. and incidents on the internet that need to be drawn to the attention of public officials. This is such an all-pervasive problem, which is quite literally in our hands every minute. We need to engage all Canadians in this effort to understand their vulnerabilities online and then make the response mechanisms at all levels of government readily available. That's
Thank you,
what
Mr.
we're trying to do.
Spiegelman.
Could I just answer one final little point, Mr. Chair? The critical infrastructure systems that I was referring to earlier: finance, telecommunications, energy, and transport.
Thank you for that. I'm sure Mr. Motz appreciated that.
I did, thank you.
Mr. Motz, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and team, for being here. Minister, there's been a lot of rumors floating around recently about your government considering a ban on certain types of firearms, maybe as early as this week. Very simple, clear question to you. Are you considering an order in council to ban certain firearms? Yes or no? Yes or no?
The Prime Minister invited Minister Blair to examine that question, and he will be reporting his recommendations very shortly. No final decision has been taken at this stage, but he'll be able to give you an accurate description of where he is in his deliberations when he appears.
Now, Minister, I know that generally your party tends to treat law-abiding Canadian firearms owners as second-class citizens, but I want to be clear.
No, that's not true.
The firearm industry in Canada does hundreds of millions of dollars annually in sales and is responsible for thousands upon thousands of jobs. And there are real world consequences to attempts to shore up your left flank for an election year with precious little way of accomplishment so far in your government. So again, yes or no? Do you have plans to ban firearms in this country?
Mr. Motz, you know very well that that is a specific policy area that the Prime Minister has asked Minister Blair to examine and report upon. He has conducted extensive consultations, probably the largest in Canadian history, and he will make his recommendations known very shortly.
All right, so we're still waiting. Back to my other question, we know that the majority of homicides, firearms-related homicides in this country, are not by those who have a valid firearms license. In the last 15 years or so, that percentage is extremely low. But targeting a population that is law-abiding to begin with C-71, rather than going after the gangs and gun issue that we have in this country, your government has loosened penalties for gangs and gang affiliation and made things more difficult for those who are already law-abiding gun owners. How do you reconcile that?
Well, we have invested $327 million in a strategy directly aimed at guns and gangs. $214 million of that total is going to provinces and communities to support their local anti-gun, anti-gang strategies. There's about $50 million that's going to CBSA to assist in the interdiction of illegal guns coming across the border, and there's about $35 million that is going to the RCMP in order to support their efforts at combating illegal gun trafficking. So there is a whole collection of.
In 2017, you promised $500 million to policing to combat gangs and guns, and then it was 327, and I wonder how much of that money has actually been given out to provinces to deal with their gang and gun issue.
The agreements with the provinces are in the process of being concluded. I know in my own province of Saskatchewan, the agreement has been concluded and announced by me and the provincial minister together. The announcements have been made in several provinces and territories across the country. The process is rolling forward. The commitment that we made was to get to the level of $100 million per year ongoing, and we will meet that target. The 327 that I referred to is the beginning of that commitment to help all levels of government be as effective as they possibly can in dealing with the issue of illegal guns and gangs, and you can probably also add a third component in that because it's usually present, and that is drugs. So guns, gangs, and drugs, and that's what this money is to be used for, coupled with the changes in the law that improve background checks, that require license verification, and that standardize best practices in record keeping.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. And just so you know, we won't get into the C-71 debate because that's not exactly what's going to happen. Now, your colleague, Mr. Blair, said that there's no reason for anyone to own what in reality is a modern hunting rifle because they're purpose-built to harm people. Now, that statement is not only offensive, but it is incredibly misinformed, misguided, and deliberately misleads Canadians. Now, I wonder what your response would be, sir, to the men and women, our Canadian Olympic shooting team, for example, who are representing Canada in Tokyo, when they hear of such a statement by a minister of this government.
You're going to have to save that answer. You've
Maybe after
expired
you
your
tell
time, and I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to ask Mr. Blair directly what he means by his own comments. So, with that, Ms. Hoda.
Thank you, Minister, for being here today and on all the other occasions that you've been before this committee. Your answers are always enlightening. You had mentioned in your statement something about enforcement measures for scrupulous immigration consultants and funding that is going towards that. I know that it's not just from your department, but from Immigration and Citizenship as well. Can you give me a little bit more information as to what that amount is and how enforcement measures will be enacted?
Let me ask Mr. Sowski to provide some detail on that.
Sure, thank you. So we get about 200 leads a year, which results in about 50 investigations starting each year. And the additional funds that we're going to be receiving will just help us deal with some of the more complex cases and then just overall increase our capacity to pursue these investigations and hopefully stop the problem.
So if you can elaborate on leads. So clients of these consultants call CBSA and report them?
It could be a variety of different sources that we catch wind of somebody. Sometimes it's our own analysis in terms of working with the Immigration Refugee Board if they see something suspicious. It could be a number of different ways that we would be apprised of somebody that's worthy of an investigation.
And what kind of actions or measures can you take against them?
Well, ultimately, they could face criminal charges.
And that would be within your realm, but
if it was a criminal offense, then it would depend on whether or not we did something with the RCMP. It depends on the nature of the outcome of the investigation.
Okay, and so is this something? This increase is for the first time, or this is the regular amount that's usually allocated?
No, this is an increase of $10 million over 5 years, so it's an extra around $2 million a year, if I remember the profile correctly. And it's just, as I say, to increase our capacity, because we are starting to see a little bit more. And as I said, the complexity of some of these cases representing multiple clients and trying to sort of sift through that information and focus our efforts better.
Okay. Recently, Minister, we've heard so much news in Ontario, in Quebec, and New Brunswick about flooding. How much of your budget has been spent on mitigating the effects or the aftermath, dealing with the aftermath of the flooding that has occurred?
We can actually get you a statement of the DFAA, Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangements, payments over the course of the last number of years. And it really is instructive, and I would be glad to supply that information to the committee because it shows that the losses covered by DFAA in the last 6 years are larger, mostly for floods and wildfires, are larger than the amount the program spent in all the previous years going right back to 1970.
Wow.
So something obviously happening with the climate and with the incidence of wildfires and the incidence of floods in the last number of years. The pace has accelerated dramatically.
More in the last 6 years than since 1970.
Yes.
And has the criteria changed as to what conditions, under which conditions the government would be funding, or is it mostly just due to climate change and these events occurring more often?
It is a larger number of incidents that tend to be more serious and more expensive with every passing year. The criteria is essentially the same. In fact, a few years ago, the previous government adjusted the funding formula so the provinces would pay for a larger portion before the federal share would click in. And that would tend to reduce the amount that the federal government would be paying because the cost sharing formula was adjusted a little bit. But despite that, the volume of federal payments is higher because the losses are larger. And you can just think of the spectacular ones, the flooding around High River, Alberta, a few years ago. I think that was the most expensive flood in Canadian history. Fort Mac in northern Alberta was the most expensive fire disaster in Canadian history. That was followed by 2 very expensive years in British Columbia. We're also having serious issues this spring. The floods a few weeks ago in Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick, and now in the last week or so, we've seen the fires at Pikanchkum First Nation in northwestern Ontario and in northern Alberta. I think it's about 11,000 people now that are evacuated in northern Alberta. The entire community at Pikanchkum is in the process of being evacuated. So it's a very serious problem. Climate change has its consequences, and they are growing more serious.
We have to leave it there. We're getting close to the end, but I think Mr. Glinsky might have a couple minutes here to ask a question if he wishes to.
I hope it's about Grand Cache.
Not this lucky this time. Thank you to all the witnesses. Congratulations, Brian, on your recent promotion.
These are former colleagues.
To the minister, as you're aware, we did a public safety report on rural crime, and my Alberta colleagues and myself did quite an extensive roundhouse consultation throughout the province, and people are very concerned, not only in Alberta but in Saskatchewan. I understand you heard from some of their mayors about the shortage of RCMP. Crime increased by about 30% in rural Canada versus urban. But what really alarms me is I just looked at the RCMP 2018-2019 plan, and in there it has your manpower progressions over the last 5 years up to year 2019, year 2020. And actually the law enforcement program is calling for a reduction in policing officers, actually from 1366 to 1399. These are just the manpower numbers coming off your thing. So you're actually decreasing the overall strength of the force by 1,033. And of that, you're increasing the administration by 460. So your increase is only about 0.6, 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.2% over the next few years. The attrition rate has to 10 times that number. How are you going to provide policing, and how can you tell the people in rural Canada, whether it's Saskatchewan, whether it's Manitoba, BC, or Alberta, where that policing is going to come from? Are you going to look at your contract to look at strengthening those numbers? Because the numbers you have here show that you don't have the manpower.
I'll ask Deputy Commissioner to respond to that as well. But Mr. Glinsky, just to point out, we are now we have tripled the capacity of new recruits coming out of the Depot Training Academy in Regina, over 1,100 compared to a much smaller number earlier. We have also, if I remember correctly, the figures last year of new people going into Saskatchewan was about 135, which was a significant increase. This coming year, about 90 new officers going into that particular region. So the part of your answer is we're increasing the capacity of training at Depot to generate officers more rapidly. As you know, you can't do this overnight. You want to be sending officers to do the job of protecting Canadians who are fully trained and qualified to do that job. So it's a serious business. So accelerating the recruits. The commanding officers in both Alberta and in Saskatchewan have also taken initiatives in the last 2 to 3 years to make their deployment of officers more based upon criminal intelligence, so that they're being deployed more strategically than was perhaps previously the case. And I note that both the Attorney General of Saskatchewan and the commanding officer in Alberta have observed that in the last year they've actually seen an improvement in the crime statistics.
Just one quick question, if I may.
Well,
Thank you. To Mr. Brennan,
one quick
are you
question.
meeting the recruiting needs? Are you getting the recruits?
I'm very pleased to have given you this 10 seconds, which is in the history of parliamentary procedure stretched into
I
a
love
couple
you for it, big
couple
guy.
minutes. It's what you call a buzzer beater. Can you answer that
Take a shot.
briefly, Mr. Brennan?
Yes, we're meeting the recruiting numbers to ensure that we are on track for 40 troops a year to go through Depot, and we're continuing to examine ways to increase our recruiting capacity to ensure that that is sustained over a long period of time.
So at 40 out of 52 weeks in the year, that's a graduating class of almost one a week coming out of Depot.
Yeah. Well, with that answer, you're going to have to live with that answer, Mr. Glinski. I did pick up on Ms. Sahoda's question, and with respect to the increase in the disaster assistance money, I think that would be of interest to all of us. So if that could be made available to the committee, that would be useful. With that, I want to thank you for your appearance here, Minister, and your colleagues. I suspect that you're leaving and the colleagues remain, and Minister Blair is next. So with that, we're suspended. Assuming, I see we still have quorum. Welcome Minister Blair here. And we have not only Minister Blair, but we have to deal with the estimates themselves. And we have another motion to pass with respect to C91 or 93, the recommendations that we'd like to get done as well. So my proposal is that we leave ourselves 10 minutes at the end of the, well, I don't know, that may be a problem. So I would encourage colleagues and ministers and witnesses to be economical in their questions and their answers, if that's at all possible. So with that, may I welcome Minister Blair to the committee once again, and we look forward to your remarks and questions thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will endeavor to be judicious in my responses, to adhere to your direction. It's a pleasure to once again have the opportunity to join the committee to discuss the 2019-2020 main estimates. These estimates will include authorities for measures that, of course, were announced in Budget 2019. I'd like to take the opportunity to focus on some of the important measures that will fall within my mandate to ensure that our borders remain secure and leading efforts to reduce organized crime. On the latter, as I've noted to this committee previously, taking action against gun and gang violence remains a top priority. We've seen an increase in gun violence across the country in recent years. Guns are still getting into the hands of people who would commit crimes with them, and while the measures in Bill C-71, I think, are exceptional and will go a long way to reversing that trend, I also believe that there is more that we can do. Earlier this month, we issued a report outlining what we heard in an extensive cross-country engagement on this issue. And in the meantime, funding through these estimates in Budget 2019 can and will make a real difference right away. I've noted before that of the $327 million over 5 years that the government announced in 2017 is already beginning to help support a variety of initiatives to reduce gun and gang activity in our communities across Canada. And over the past few months, I have been pleased to work with provinces, territories, and municipalities as we roll out their portions of that funding specific to initiatives in their region. The Government of Canada is investing an additional $42 million through this year's estimates in the Guns and Gangs Initiative. This is a horizontal initiative which is being led by Public Safety Canada, and they are working in partnership, as always, with the Canada Border Services Agency and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. With respect to policing more specifically in this year's budget, there is a substantial funding for policing, including $508.6 million over 5 years to support the RCMP in strengthening policing operations. And of that $508.6 million, there is $96.2 million allotted for the RCMP policing operations in the estimates provided today. The RCMP is, of course, absolutely key to protecting our national security, to reducing the threat of organized crime, and to supporting prevention, intervention, and enforcement initiatives right across Canada. The CBSA supports the RCMP and other law enforcement partners in Canada to counter organized crime and gang activity. Investments made through the estimates and budget will support new technologies, increased detector dog teams, specialized training and tools, and an augmented intelligence and risk assessment capacity. All of this, Mr. Chair, will help to enhance the CBSA's operational responses to better interdict illicit goods, such as firearms and opioids, from crossing our borders. And I'm confident the funding we're providing will help all of our partners keep Canada's evolving safety and security needs and in place, and include addressing guns and gang challenges. With respect to the border security aspects of my mandate, I'm pleased to report that the government is making significant investments through the budget and these estimates to better manage, discourage, and to prevent irregular migration. Budget 2019 provides $1.2 billion over 5 years, starting this year, to IRCC and the IRB, the CBSA, RCMP, and CSIS to implement a comprehensive asylum reform and border action plan. And while our IRCC is the lead on this action plan, the public safety portfolio has a very significant contribution to make. As the committee is aware, CBSA is responsible for processing refugee claims which are made at official points of entry and at their inland offices. The funding approved under Budget 2019 will enable the CBSA to strengthen their processes at our border, to help increase the asylum system's capacity, and to accelerate claim processing. It will facilitate the removal of individuals found not to be in need of genuine protection from Canada in a more efficient and timely way. The strategy, supported by that funding, will guide these efforts. Before I close, I'd like to take the opportunity to highlight one further item. Canadians have been hearing a great deal lately about money laundering, terrorism financing, and tax evasion happening within our country, and they are rightly concerned. Money laundering is not only a threat to public safety, it harms the integrity and stability of the financial sector and the economy more broadly. The government is not waiting to take action to protect Canada's safety, security, and quality of life. And I'm pleased to note that in Budget 2019, the government will invest $24 million over 5 years for Public Safety Canada to create an anti-money laundering action, coordination, and enforcement unit, or ACE. This is a pilot project which will strengthen interagency action against money laundering and financial crimes. In addition, a further $68.9 million will be invested over 5 years, allocated to the RCMP to enhance federal policing capacity, including the effort to fight money laundering, beginning with $4.1 million allocated in this fiscal year. In addition, $28 million over 5 years is being invested in CBSA to support a new center of expertise. That center will work to identify and prosecute incidents of trade fraud, as well as to identify potential cases of trade-based money laundering to be referred to the RCMP for investigation and prosecution. Mr. Chair, as always, these are just a few examples of the important and vital work that the public safety portfolio, and in this case, the many departments that support my mandate, are doing to protect Canadians. Once again, I thank the committee members for your consideration of these estimates and for your ongoing efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Minister. With that, Ms. DeBruzen, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Minister, for being with us today. I've had the opportunity to raise this before, and I would like to continue in that conversation about guns and gangs. And I know that you mentioned it in your opening, and was looking through the main estimates about the work that's being done by on border operations as well. My first question is, when we're looking at gun issues and all the conversations I've had, we're really talking about supply and demand, both pieces. And if we're first looking at the supply side of things, you mentioned it briefly, but could you tell us a little bit more about what's being done by the CBSA to prevent gun smuggling?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Bruson. Guns that end up in the hands of criminals and are used to commit violent crimes in our community have a number of different sources. There are various estimates available from various police services and agencies across the country determining the source of those illicit guns. It's quite clear that a significant portion of the guns that are used to commit criminal offenses by gangs in our communities across Canada are illicitly imported into Canada across our borders. And CBSA, of course, has a very important role in interdicting that supply. I had the opportunity just on the weekend. I went down and visited the Port Edward CBSA facility and had the opportunity to speak about some of the work that they're doing there. The use of new technologies, the dog teams, and frankly, some really extraordinary dedicated individuals.
If I can jump in there, when you're talking about dog teams, you're actually talking about dogs.
Yeah, right? Real dog.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, met the dog. His name was Bones. They showed me as he searched the car. Really extraordinary, use of even that. It's low tech, but it works, and it works really well. And they were able to also share with me some of the extraordinary successes that they've been able to achieve, including, for example, the seizure of a very high-powered assault rifle just over the May 24th weekend, a number of large capacity magazines and ammunition. And so there is some excellent work that's taking place across our borders. But I will also tell you there's a acknowledgement within CBSA and within the law enforcement community that to indict the supply of guns coming across the border from the United States, and the United States is essentially the largest handgun arsenal in the world, and there are many firearms there. And criminals know that if they can bring those guns across our border, they can be sold at a significant premium above what they would pay in the U.S. Because they're not as readily available in Canada. And so, it's a crime motivated by profit. But the police and CBSA understand that you can't just interdict the supply at the border. And so there are some extraordinary efforts taking place. And we are investing in the RCMP and in municipal and provincial police services right across Canada who work in integrated border enforcement teams and conduct organized crime investigations to identify the individuals and the criminal organizations who are responsible for purchasing these guns in the United States and smuggling them across the border and then subsequently selling them to criminals in our country. And we have seen some extraordinary successes as well as a result of that partnership, but the work continues and ongoing. And we are making significant investments in this budget, in CBSA and in law enforcement's capacity to conduct those investigations, to improve the quality of the intelligence that they gather and how they use that data to affect good success in their investigations and successful prosecutions for the individuals who are responsible.
Thank you. And staying on the supply side, I'm hoping we have a few minutes for demand. You have had a study. It was part of your mandate letter. You were asked to study a possible ban on handguns and assault weapons. And there was, I believe, a What We Heard report that was released. Would you be able to tell us about what the next steps are?
We identified a number of ways in which guns were getting into the hands of criminals. And as I've already mentioned, a portion of those, some estimate 50%, some estimates as much as 70% are in fact smuggled across the border. But we also know that a number of those firearms that are subsequently used to commit criminal offenses in Canada are domestically sourced. And essentially, there are a number of reasonably well identified ways in which that takes place. The first one, and there has been a significant number of large-scale thefts where guns have been stolen either from a gun retailer or from an individual Canadian gun owner, and those guns subsequently are then made available on the street, sold to criminal organizations, and used in criminal acts across the country. And so one of the things that I heard and we discussed very extensively was how we might improve the secure storage of firearms to prevent those thefts, to make it harder for criminals to steal those guns and subsequently for them to go on the street. There were also a number of cases where firearms were identified that had been purchased legally in this country, but then subsequently diverted into the criminal market by an individual intent on profiting by resale of those guns. It's a process sometimes referred to as straw purchasing, but it's an individual who has a legal authority to purchase a handgun, sometimes tries to conceal its origin by removing the serial number and then reselling it on the street to somebody at a significant profit. We identified in conversations across the country, and particularly with law enforcement, the importance of improving the tracing of those firearms that are used in criminal offenses so that we can determine its origin of sale and better identify, and by detecting, thereby deterring and holding accountable those individuals who are involved in that criminal activity. And so there were a number of other measures that we also heard about interdicting the supply. And I've also heard from a number of people who expressed concern that certain types of weapons are frankly a significant risk, that additional steps should be considered in making them less available to those who would use them to harm others.
You're not quite finished yet, but I'm sure Mr. Graham will thank you if, in fact, we finish before 7 minutes. But you still have 40 seconds left.
I do. Thank you.
Okay.
Just to the demand piece quickly, because we were at an announcement in Toronto in December, specifically about how do we help youth and how do we help the communities who've been impacted. If you could tell me a bit about that,
Mr.
please.
Bruton, much of my earlier comments were with respect to interdicting the supply of guns that get into hands of criminals, but our government recognizes that you also have to reduce the demand for those guns. And so we are also making significant investments in communities and in kids, and working with particularly municipalities, but I've been to each province, and we're providing resources to each of the provinces and territories to make investments in their communities and in those community organizations that frankly do an extraordinary job of working with young people to help them make better choices, safer and more socially responsible choices, and to avoid getting involved in gangs in the first place. And there are also a number of initiatives that we are supporting, working with young people who've already gotten involved in gangs to help them leave that gang lifestyle and to not engage in violent criminal activity that causes so much trauma in our communities across the country. So, there's not one single response. Frankly, it requires very significant investments. And we're also looking, and more broadly,
I think we're going to have to leave the answer.
I'll perhaps have the opportunity to come back to some of the other things we're doing that are making a difference. Yes, Mr. Chair.
The talent for stretching seconds into minutes is quite extraordinary today.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Balous, 7 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Ministre. Thank you, Chair. Minister, we were speaking of smuggling across the border. The Auditor General presented a report that was highly critical about the system that you've just said is very efficient, and they confirmed that it was overworked. A lot of difficulty ensuring collaboration between the various bodies as well. It will take 4 or 5 years just to get things up and running the way they should be. Here you are telling us here before the committee that all is going well, it's all terrific and hunky-dory. So are you concerned? Are you telling us the truth?
It's being done by CBSA and by the RCMP, by the police, provincial and municipal, right across the country. Given the resources and support that they've had available to them, I think they do an extraordinary job. But we recognize that more needs to be done. And it's precisely why we're making significant new investments and increasing their capacity to conduct these very complex investigations. And just for example, we recognize the importance of all law enforcement and departments and agencies working more collaboratively together. It's one of the reasons we're establishing for the money laundering thing a action coordination and enforcement center.
Vous confirmez, à l'époque, lorsque vous nous avez dit que tout allait.
So, you've told us all is well, and the Auditor General has told us that's not entirely true. So are you saying that your information back then wasn't correct? You didn't have the right information?
Report you are referring to, sir?
Le rapport du vérificateur général, ou du directeur parlementaire du budget, plutôt, confirmé qu'il y avait...
Auditor General, or actually the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who confirmed that there were some issues. $1 million, for example, for management of asylum claimants. You know what I'm speaking of? The report that was tabled a couple of months ago.
So I was referring to guns and money laundering, and if you're talking about asylum claimants, one of the things that that was identified, I believe, in that report was the work that was being done in security screening by CBSA, and
Okay, my question, sir, is quite simple. Just because a few months ago when you came at committee, we asked a question about the issue, and you said everything's fine, but en anglais, je sais pas, vérificateur général said that there's many issues with that, and then my question was just, are you, est-ce que vous vous excusez? Are you ready to excuse in front of a committee because you said something wrong at that time? Well, it's just my question, but I lost too many time for that. So next question, sir.
Do you want an answer to that, sir? I'm happy to try to answer your question.
But I've lost enough time, sir. I will ask another question, okay?
If you have any other questions you don't want answered, let me know.
Man. It's all right, because you don't understand my question. But in your speaking note here, okay? Refer to that. Yep. You have talk about, in the budget, talk about investment, $1.2 billion, okay, on 5 years. But actually, is this the same numbers that the... Comment on dit vérificateur général in English? Auditor General said it would cost $1.1 billion on 3 years. Is it the same money?
I believe the Auditor General concluded his report and his estimates on what was required in last spring in 2018. And since that time, our government, first of all, in Budget 2018, made significant new investments in IRB and CBSA. And then, of course, in the budget we've just presented before you today, which is $1.18 billion, we just as an example, we're increasing the capacity of IRB from where it was when the Auditor General conducted his report, which was their ability to do about 26,000 hearings per year. And under these new investments, by the end of next year, they'll be at approximately 50,000. And so it responds very directly to the deficiency that was identified as a result of understaffing and underfunding that had previously been experienced. But we made those investments in Budget 2018 and 2019.
No. Okay, you make a lot of things, sir. Okay, your title as minister is the Organized Crime Reduction and Border Security, okay? And on the Organized Crime Reduction, it's you're supposed to talk about the Mexican cartels, drug cartels too? But why does Minister Goodale's office always answer to the media question and not your?
is the Minister of Public Safety.
But you're the Minister of Boris Kerry and Organized Crime Reduction. Is that
Well,
true?
I've listened very carefully to Minister Goodall's response and even his earlier response today, and I have exactly the same information as he provided to this committee. It is a direct result of information provided by our agencies, and I believe he did confirm that CBSA has determined that the number of inadmissibility cases for the period was 238, and also questioned that we have been unable to determine
I don't want
any
his
evidence
answer, I
that
want your
suggests
answer.
that the number that you raised in the House, 400 foreign nationals in Canada,
Okay.
we haven't been able to find any evidence that supports the veracity or truth of that statement.
Okay, next question. Last week, U.S. Vice President Pence came to meet the Prime Minister. And you think they raised a question about the third safe country agreement? Did it?
I believe that it
Okay,
did come up
you
in
have
your
an answer for us, or do you think we will change the agreement, or
There are discussions. I've been involved in discussions with the U.S. officials, as well as our officials at both IRCC and CBSA. I know that it has been raised at a number of different levels of discussion. And I think there's an acknowledgement or recognition that that's an agreement that can be modernized and improved to the benefit of both countries, and those discussions are
But
ongoing.
modernized for you mean that must change the like we suggest last year, or?
Well, actually, as I recall, your suggestion was that we just unilaterally change a bilateral agreement, and that's not how that works. And so we have begun to have discussions with our treaty partners, the United States, to discuss many aspects of that agreement because we believe there is an opportunity for it to be improved and enhanced. And so those discussions are ongoing. It is not possible, nor is it appropriate to just simply unilaterally change a bilateral agreement.
No, we never said that. We
Well,
always said that we have to deal with.
Just to be clear, you said you would just change it, and
No,
we said
never.
no, we would actually enter into discussions with our partner on how it could be improved.
Of course, we have to do. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paulus. Mr. Dubé, 7 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. My question is about your responsibilities for border management and immigration. Let's go back a little bit, and this will be a long preamble. I'm sorry, we've sometimes had long answers, so I'll just take some time for the preamble so that you'll understand the context and the background thoroughly. And I would suggest to my colleagues, if they haven't read this news recently, to take note of it. There was a program created in 2011, if I'm not mistaken, and some boats came in with some Tamil asylum claimants in it. And this was a strategy that was set up then by the prior government. But the strategy is still on the books. And of course, when it comes to spending on these things, it costs more now. 18 million have been spent on this particular programming. And if I'm not mistaken, the RCMP, and sometimes CSIS as well, work outside the country with some very doubtful characters in the foreign countries that may be trafficking immigrants into Canada, potential immigrants. So, of course, there are a number of difficult issues for these poor people. We all agree on that. But anyway, this was news coverage at Radio-Canada, the French CBC. So, I would like to know how we can reconcile the government's approach in these matters, the approach of, open-armed compassion and so on for these poor people stuck here, and the fact that we have these agents working overseas to interdict and so on and so forth. Yes, people who are, working at a criminal level, a lot of risks for all these people in these foreign countries. And if you're not able to respond, I know there are other people perhaps here with you who could throw some light on this. So in the Radio-Canada show, neither the IRB or CSIS were able to or willing to say much. So it's a long background question, but I think that was important just to ensure that you understand what I'm talking about.
If I understand your question appropriately, and I'll certainly invite officials to add any additional background or detail that will be assist you. But in my experience, there are unfortunately individuals, those who are seeking refuge, those who are fleeing war and persecution, are in a very vulnerable state, and quite often they are subject to exploitation by those who would intend to profit from that. And so we have a responsibility as well to ensure that in order to maintain the integrity of our refugee determination system and the integrity of our borders, CBSA and the RCMP and others who work together have a responsibility, and we do work internationally. Frankly, we are very concerned, and we've taken a number of steps to deal with those who would exploit people who are in a vulnerable position.
So let me, certainly I don't disagree with that characterization of individuals who want to take advantage of people in vulnerable situations. The issue in this report, this media report that I'm raising here, is that the Government of Canada has a program and invests millions of dollars. I think it's $1 million to CSIS, 9 to the RCMP, if I remember correctly. I could be mistaken. In order for them to operate abroad in regions where, in order to deal with those unscrupulous individuals, you're dealing with equally, if not more, unscrupulous regimes in those particular countries. There's the individual in the Prime Minister's office, or at any rate that advises the Prime Minister on this program, that has gone to these places to thank these regimes on behalf of Canada. And so the question is, at what cost do we ensure the integrity of the border? So in other words, is there not a responsibility to not only ensure the integrity of the border and take on these unscrupulous individuals, but also to ensure that we're not, and pardon the expression, but getting into bed with some pretty problematic, if I can say so diplomatically, individuals abroad, as the report outlines, which again I would invite colleagues to read and would be more than happy to provide to members of the committee if they haven't seen it.
Yes, sir. I'll simply acknowledge, because I don't have particular insight into, and if any of my colleagues does wish to jump in, but we deal with transnational organized crime, including the exploitation of vulnerable people, in human trafficking, and in those who would be involved in exploiting those fleeing persecution. It is necessary for our federal officials and our security establishment to extend their work beyond our borders in order to some of the most effective work that they do in preventing problems in Canada and crimes in Canada is by preventing that from coming to our borders in the first place. And so they are working in some very difficult places in the world. But our expectation is that they would continue to uphold, Canadian law and Canadian standards.
J'ai peu de temps, je ne sais pas si Monsieur Vigneault.
I haven't much time. I'm wondering whether Mr. Vigneault or any other official at the table would like to give your perspectives.
That the program that you refer to has been in place for a number of years now to prevent, as the minister mentioned, and as you referred to in your prelude, prevent traffickers from bringing Canadian people to Canada irregularly and often. So the reason why we are engaged is to protect the integrity of the system in Canada and make sure that criminals, national security concerns, or people are not victimized through these processes. The work we do abroad is governed by our Act and by ministerial directives. And I can not go into all the operational details, but I can say that when we do share information with foreign entities, we're under ministerial directives to make sure that this information does not lead to a human rights violation or mistreatment. And so, from that perspective, I'm familiar with what the media was reporting on this. I can say that there's been a review of these programs, and that all agencies involved are covered by this ministerial directive. So there's another perspective as well to that angle, that story.
Thank you, Mr. Dubé. Ms. Soda, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister Blair, for being here today. I want to first start with the agreements you were speaking of earlier with the different provinces in relation to the funding for gangs and guns. Can you specifically tell me a little bit about how much funding is being provided from the federal level to the Doug Ford government in Ontario?
There's approximately $214 million which is identified in the Guns and Gangs funding for the entire country. That's in addition to the money that's been allocated, some $89 million for CBSA and RCMP. Of the $214 million, $65 million is allocated to the province of Ontario. There have been ongoing discussions with the province of Ontario on how that money will be flowed to them and what they're going to do with it. And I've recently made a joint announcement with the Minister of Community Safety and the Attorney General of Ontario, where they accepted $11 million over the first 2 years of this funding program. And I'm not yet aware if they've made announcements as to how they intend to allocate that. But it's a total funding allocation over a 5-year period of $65 million. And so far, the province of Ontario has received 11 of that.
Okay, and why only 11 million at this point? Who makes that choice, and how is that decided?
It's part of ongoing discussions between us. That was all they were prepared to identify various initiatives for. But the money remains there for allocation to the province of Ontario when they're ready to use it. But they've identified so far, just in the first 2 years of the program, $11 million in initiatives that they're prepared to undertake with that money.
So are you telling me that there's $65 million available to Ontario? Because I know my counterparts in the city of Brampton have been taking a keen interest in wanting to reduce crime in the city. However, they've only accepted 11 million of the 65 that's been offered?
Well, in fairness, this is ongoing discussions between our government and all of the provinces. And we've been working out funding allocations for each of the provinces. So far, that has been identified. I would simply encourage municipalities, because the municipalities, this money is for municipal and Indigenous police services across the provinces and territories, but appropriately and necessarily allocated through the provincial governments. And so I would encourage all of the municipalities to reach out to their respective provincial government for discussions on how they might access the money that's coming from the federal government through the provincial governments.
Is there any way to provide the money directly to the municipal governments? Because I know in my city of Brampton, the city is very eager to be able to get access to some of these funds to help them with some of the problems they're dealing with. How would you, or is the only way to get access to this money to go through the province?
Well, I think it is incumbent upon us to do our very best to work with our provincial partners across the country. I will tell you that in my experience in some other jurisdictions, it's been a very positive experience, and I remain hopeful about those allocations in Ontario. I have kind of a strong interest in that place myself, and I know the municipalities and policing agencies that are involved. But again, those are decisions. I think the appropriate way. Policing is administered and overseen by the provincial governments in across Canada, and so we are working with community safety ministers, public safety ministers, and attorney generals across the country in each of the provinces and territories. We've certainly come with and done our best. There are some other funding opportunities available which are done directly, and that's more with community organizations. And there's been a number of significant announcements in Ontario, in addition to the money I've already referenced, where we're supporting community organizations in various crime prevention initiatives and other types of investments in community.
When you compare the 65 million offer to past allocated amounts, is this more or less than what the Government of Canada has provided provinces, or Ontario specifically?
I think this is, I'm not aware of funding of this magnitude previously. I've been involved in a different capacity in dealing with guns and gangs issues. Generally, our relationship was only with the provincial government. There was actually some funding that was made available in 2008 called the Police Officer Recruitment Fund, but that money was terminated in 2013.
So this kind of funding is first of its kind from the federal government to the provinces?
I think this is a government brought forward by public safety and by our government last year. A significant investment in guns and gangs initiatives, and it was also a recognition and acknowledgement after we talked with the provinces and municipal and Indigenous police services, and an acknowledgement that there was important work that needed to be done, And so when we began making investments, we made sure that there was money to flow through the provinces to those municipal and Indigenous police services, as well as our federal authorities in the RCMP, CBSA, and others, because it's the gun and gang issue is a very real concern right across the country. We've seen a significant increase in gun violence and gun murders in our country. Much of that is directly related to drugs and gang activity. And so we're making significant investments to support those efforts.
From my experience, just this last few years of paying attention and monitoring, because now issues tend to come to the members of parliament, and I've seen the increase happen generally as the weather gets better and the summer comes along. There's an increase in criminal activity that I've seen in Brampton. Is there a different approach or different allocations of funding that's budgeted for certain months? Can you speak from your past experience why that is? Is that
those operational decisions on how to allocate their resources and use these new resources is really the responsibility of police services and their leaders under the direction of their boards and their municipalities, and done very much in collaboration with the provincial authority. There are also very significant partnerships that exist right across this country among law enforcement. And so, for example, there's a number of important initiatives that are led by the RCMP in what we call Combined Forces Special Enforcement Units, as an example, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Teams, and others where other all police services will participate and I should mention, because it's quite relevant to my mandate, the Integrated Border Enforcement Teams, which are usually led by the federal agency, but which other police services participate in as well. And these types of initiatives are supported by the funding that we provide.
Thank you, Ms. Soda. Mr. Motts, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. Minister, last week you said assault-style rifles are military weapons designed to hunt people. Now, I don't know what you refer to as an assault-style rifle, but I suspect you're referring to automatic rifles, automatic firearms, and you know that those firearms have been prohibited in this country since 1976. So can you tell us exactly what firearms you're referring to with that statement?
Yeah, we've had a number of discussions. As I said, I've traveled across the country, Mr. Mott.
But exactly, what firearms are you referring to specifically with that statement?
Firearms that were designed for a military purpose. Firearms that were...
I don't know what that means. So that statement to me, you're referring to, in reality, modern hunting rifles, modern sporting rifles, in that statement, the very fact that you made that statement, I find it extremely offensive. I find it misguided. I find it misinformed, and you're misleading the Canadian public with that. And so again, what firearms are you referring to specifically?
And I'm sorry you were offended, but I was thinking about
Canadian licensed firearm owners are offended by
Mr. Motts.
Well, and I was thinking about the firearm that was used to kill 3 Mounties in Moncton. And that was a firearm that was designed for military use. It was originally created and used by the military. It was a weapon that was used by that individual to hunt 3 police officers and murder them.
What was the rifle? What was the firearm?
I believe it was an M14. But I was also thinking about the weapons that were used to kill the 2 officers in Fredericton and 2 private citizens. I was also thinking about the weapon that was used to kill 14 women at École Polytechnique.
But and the weapon that was used to kill
the worshippers in the mosque in Quebec. These are all weapons that were not designed as hunting weapons. They were designed for soldiers.
You've identified the AR-15 specifically, Mr. Minister. You've identified it. So do you know, has the AR-15 ever been used for a crime committed in Canada?
The AR-15 is and again I've mentioned some of the other shootings. They were not AR-15s, but the AR-15 is the number one weapon used.
2004, and no one was
Point
injured.
of order, Mr. Chair.
Right.
We're just not getting the answers to these questions.
I get that point of order.
The AR-15 is the weapon that was used to kill a whole bunch of little kids at Sandy Hook. It was also used to murder 50 people in Christchurch.
Canada.
Mr. Motts, if you want to ask your question,
Well, then
and then let the minister finish his answer, and then you go back to asking another question.
Minister, can you describe the difference between an AR-15, which is currently restricted in this country, and the WK-180C?
Okay, there's a specific question, a specific answer, if you may, please.
And frankly, I don't consider myself an expert in the classification of those firearms, although I am familiar with both. And I would perhaps, Turin, I don't know whether any of the other witnesses have the expertise to define it. The classification is determined, as you know, now by the RCMP.
Okay, we
Right,
now
so
have, we have a specific answer to a specific question,
Yes,
a
so let me-
second specific question.
Let
Mr.
me
Moss.
answer the question for you. They are virtually the same firearm. They fire a 223 round. They have the same operational mechanisms to them. The only difference is, and which I'm glad you identified the idea of classifications. The Canadian public wants firearms classified by what they can do, not by what they look like. And that's been a challenge that's been going on. C-71 is a prime example of that. We need facts to guide these decisions, not cosmetics, Mr. Minister.
That's a comment. That's not
Yeah,
a question.
it is. So is
excuse
there
me,
any
Mr.
truth-
Motz. Mr. Motz, does the minister wish to respond to Mr. Motz's comment?
No.
No.
So
Mr.
there's
Motz,
been
next
lots
question.
of rumors floating around over the last while about your government's plans to ban firearms, ranging from banning specific firearms to banning semi-automatic firearms to handguns. So very yes or no question. Will an order in council be issued banning certain classes of firearms? Yes or no?
Mr. Mott, I don't normally respond to rumors.
That's not a rumor. I'm asking a direct question.
And if I may.
Is an order in council yes or no?
Mr.
Yes or no?
Motz, you've asked a specific question.
It doesn't have to do the
And
dance.
it took you half a minute to do that. I should allocate some similar time to Minister Blair to respond to your question.
We are looking at all the measures that we believe could help keep Canadians safe, and we're examining the right way to deal with those measures.
So if a no order in council is being planned, do you have a different plan in order to ban firearms, as you've indicated?
Okay, that's the end of that question.
and-
Briefly respond to Mr. Motz, and then he's finished his 5 minutes.
I have a plan to examine every way in which we can keep Canadians safe.
Thank you, Mr. Motz.
Continue to dance.
Mr. Graham, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. As you know, I'm a rural Canadian who has firearms in the house, and I do fire them from time to time. So I want to know, now, if the last time I fired an AR-15 was only a month ago, so I want to put that in perspective. What are we doing to protect lawful users of firearms going forward?
I also want to be very clear. The mandate I was given by the government was to examine every measure that could keep people safe, with a very important and specific caveat. And that was an acknowledgement and a recognition that the overwhelming majority of firearm owners in this country are law-abiding, responsible in their ownership. They acquire their firearms legally. They store them securely. They use them responsibly, and they dispose of them according to the law. And you know, firearm ownership in this country is a privilege that is predicated on people's willingness and acceptance of our laws and regulations as it pertains to firearms. And in my experience, the overwhelming majority of Canadians are exceptionally responsible and law-abiding with respect to their firearms. And I think it's really critically important that we always respect that. But at the same time, we have a responsibility to make sure those are not dangerous people, and particularly hunters and farmers and sports shooters. They're very, very careful with their weapons, and we just have to make sure that those weapons don't end up in the hands of people who would commit violent crimes with them. And in my experience and in my discussions across the country, I believe those responsible gun owners are also equally concerned with public safety and to ensure that their firearms don't end up in the hands of criminals.
I appreciate that. Do you have time still?
5 minutes, Mr.
Okay.
In
I
part
thought
due to the efficiency.
I thought you wanted 10 minutes left at the end.
Yeah.
Because I appreciate your responses. I wanted to ask Mr. Tousignan, I believe you're from CSC. A very quick question before I come back to Mr. Blair. I would have asked this in the previous panel, but didn't have a chance. So, in my riding, there is the Macassa Penitentiary, which has 28 Beaumark missile silos. I would like to know if CSC can help us prevent those from being torn down.
I have to get back to you on that. Like
they're on Macassa Penitentiary lands, that's why I asked
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Okay. Well,
I'll get back to you on that one and answer. Thanks.
No, I just want it on the record because it is part of a heritage. I don't want to lose that heritage, and it is used as storage units, and it has amiante. I forgot that is in English, and there's asbestos. They want to take it out. They want to remove these silos. I don't want that to happen. So save the
missile
Woodmark
silos. Okay,
save the missile silos.
That's different. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Mr. Blair, I don't know if it's you or health or both, but I would like to dive into the marijuana laws a little tiny bit. A lot of municipalities in my riding are, as you know, if a large rural riding, there's a lot of medical marijuana operations being set up. And a lot of towns are complaining to me that they're not finding out about them. And I would like to know what the responsibility of a license requester has to notify the police, fire, and the municipalities. And if you could help me with that.
Yeah, those are regulations that are outside of the Cannabis Act, where someone gets an authorization for growing cannabis, but they still have to adhere to, first of all, Health Canada's regulations with respect to those facilities, and they are also subject to municipal bylaws and zoning regulations where they exist. And I say that because not every place has such bylaws, but we've had a number of these incidents where there have been issues with respect to smell, light pollution, noise, and other things that are problematic, and so in those circumstances, Health Canada has a role, and there are regulations that apply specifically to those medical marijuana authorized grows, which are not the licensed producers under the Cannabis Act. But there's a significant role for local regulatory authorities, particularly by law enforcement, in order to address those things. And I would encourage you, if you have such facilities in your riding which are problematic for your community, by all means, reach out to us, and we'll make sure that Health Canada, certainly, if to the extent that they're able to assist with their regulations, and we also, in many circumstances, are able to work with the local municipal authority or regional authority in order to address those concerns.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I'm going to bring questioning to a close, and hey, Bo, are you? Yeah,
I had a really nice question.
Well, it'll be the first time you've had a nice question in a long time. So,
I'd love to answer your nice question.
Yeah, you can ask your nice question offline. We do have to pass the estimates, which is the purpose for which we're here. On behalf of the committee, I want to thank you, Minister Blair, and all your officials for being here while we go through these estimates. With that, colleagues, and while the others leave, I'm going to suggest, and it's up to the colleagues whether we want to do roughly 30 votes all at once, presumably all on with one vote on division. Is that a preferable way to proceed, or do you want to divide up the votes? We moved that they'll all be done at once. Shall all of votes 1, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and 35, and all of the various additional votes therein carry on division? Okay. Shall I report the votes on the 2019-20 main estimates to the House? And that's unanimous? Okay. Okay, with that, meeting adjourned.